My MIL humiliated me at her birthday party, so my husband and I cut her off financially. Then she started creating false rumors about me. Hey Reddit, I'm Sarah, 33, and I've been dealing with a toxic mother-in-law who has made my life a living hell ever since I married her son. Things came to a head recently when she humiliated me at her birthday party, and my husband, Josh, 35, finally reached his breaking point. We decided to cut her off financially, which sent her on a vindictive rampage, spreading nasty rumors about me to anyone who would listen. Here's the story of how we took back control of our lives and set boundaries that we should have enforced a long time ago. I met Josh 10 years ago when we were both working at a tech company in New York. He was a software developer, and I was in marketing. From the moment I saw him in the office, I felt a spark. Josh had this warm, easygoing personality and an infectious smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. We started as friends, meeting for coffee and chatting about work, but it quickly turned into something more. Josh and I were perfect together. We shared a love for hiking, trying new foods, and exploring the city on weekends. He was the kind of guy who remembered the little things, like my favorite coffee order or the song I'd been humming under my breath. When we started dating, everything felt effortless. I knew early on that he was the one. Within 2 years, we were married, and it felt like my life had fallen perfectly into place. Josh had grown up in a small town in Pennsylvania, raised by his single mom, Carol, now 58. His dad had left when Josh was just a baby, and Carol had raised him on her own, working long hours as a secretary at a local high school to make ends meet. Josh adored his mom and often spoke about how hard she worked and how much she'd sacrificed for him. When I met Carol for the first time, I was nervous. I knew how important she was to Josh, and I wanted her to like me. At first, things were fine. Carol was welcoming, though a bit overbearing. She'd tell me stories about Josh's childhood, showing me old photo albums and reminiscing about the good old days. She was clearly proud of the son she'd raised and wasn't shy about letting everyone know how much she'd done for him. Josh was my whole world, she'd say, with a hint of sadness in her voice. I gave up everything to make sure he had the best. In the beginning, I tried my best to get along with Carol. I knew how much she meant to Josh, and I wanted to make an effort. We'd invite her over for dinner, include her in holiday celebrations, and even took her on a few vacations with us. But no matter how hard I tried, it always felt like Carol saw me as competition rather than family. She'd make little comments about how Josh used to do things differently before he met me, or how she missed the old days when it was just the two of them. One time, after a family dinner, she pulled me aside and said, "You know, Sarah, you're lucky to have Josh. I raised him to be the perfect man. I just hope you can keep up." I laughed it off, thinking she was joking, but over time, it became clear that Carol meant every word. She saw Josh as her greatest achievement, and anyone who came into his life was seen as a threat. Still, I was determined to make it work. I kept telling myself that Carol was just adjusting to having someone else in Josh's life and that things would get better over time. But they didn't. Every visit turned into an opportunity for Carol to criticize me, from the way I cooked to how I dressed and even the way I spoke. She had this way of making everything about her. If we made plans without her, she'd guilt-trip Josh about how lonely she was. If we included her, she'd find a way to make me feel like an outsider. I was constantly walking on eggshells, trying to avoid her wrath. Carol's behavior escalated during our engagement. She inserted herself into every aspect of wedding planning, often overriding my decisions. When I picked out a classic white dress, she remarked, "You know, Josh always liked me in blue. Maybe you should consider something a little different." I wanted to scream that I wasn't trying to marry Josh's mother, but I held my tongue, hoping that after the wedding, she'd back off. But Carol had no intention of relinquishing control. The real trouble started when Josh and I bought our first house. It was a cute 3-bedroom in the suburbs, perfect for starting a family. We were over the moon, excited about this new chapter in our lives. Carol, however, had a different reaction. She showed up unannounced one afternoon, criticizing everything from the paint colors to the furniture we'd picked out. "It's nice," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "But it's not what I would have chosen." From then on, Carol's meddling only intensified. She'd call Josh multiple times a day, often when we were having dinner or trying to relax. She'd complain about everything, her bills, her neighbors, her health, and Josh, being the dutiful son, would drop everything to listen. It was like she couldn't stand not being the center of attention, and she was determined to insert herself into every aspect of our lives. She'd even stop by unannounced, letting herself in with the spare key we'd given her for emergencies. More than once, I'd come home to find her rearranging our living room or cleaning our kitchen with a judgmental scowl. It was as if she was trying to reclaim her place in Josh's life, and I was just an inconvenience she had to tolerate. One of the biggest issues we faced was Carol's constant need for financial support. She'd always struggled with money, never having much saved and living on a modest pension. Josh had been helping her out since he got his first job, paying her bills, buying her groceries, and covering her medical expenses. At first, I didn't mind helping. I understood that Carol had raised Josh on her own, and I respected her for that. But as time went on, her requests became more frequent and more extravagant. It started small, with Josh covering her phone bill or helping her out with groceries, but it quickly escalated. Carol's house needed repairs, new windows, a roof replacement, plumbing issues, and she expected Josh to pay for all of it. "Josh, you're my only son," she'd say, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't have anyone else to turn to." Josh, wanting to be a good son, would always come through, even when it stretched us thin. Soon, it wasn't just emergencies. Carol began asking for money for things that were far from necessities. She wanted to redecorate her kitchen, update her bathroom, and even take a trip to Florida with her friends. Josh tried to set limits, but Carol had a way of guilt-tripping him that made it hard for him to say no. She'd remind him of all the things she'd done for him growing up, how she'd worked multiple jobs just to keep a roof over their heads, and how he owed her for everything. "Josh, you know I've sacrificed so much for you," she'd say, her voice trembling just enough to make him feel guilty. "I just need a little help. I don't have anyone else." Josh and I would argue about it sometimes. I wasn't trying to be heartless, but I was tired of Carol's constant demands and her refusal to take responsibility for her own finances. "We can't keep bailing her out," I'd say. "She needs to learn to live within her means." Josh would nod, agreeing in theory, but when Carol called, he'd cave every time. It was like he couldn't stand the thought of disappointing her. And Carol knew exactly how to play on that. She'd cry, complain, and make Josh feel like he was the only thing keeping her afloat. It was exhausting, and it started to put a strain on our marriage. Things reached a boiling point when Carol asked Josh to co-sign a loan for a condo she couldn't afford. She was living in her modest home, but she wanted to upgrade to something newer and flashier, and she saw Josh as her golden ticket. When he hesitated, she unleashed a torrent of guilt, reminding him of all the sacrifices she'd made as a single mother. "Josh, I gave up everything for you," she shouted during one particularly heated argument. "Is it so much to ask that you help your own mother?" Josh refused to co-sign, and Carol didn't speak to him for weeks. She sulked, sent passive-aggressive texts, and made him feel like the worst son in the world. I tried to be supportive, but I was furious. Carol's manipulative behavior was pushing us to our breaking point, and something had to change. The financial strain was only part of the problem. Carol's emotional manipulation was taking its toll on Josh. He was constantly stressed, juggling work, our home life, and his mother's endless demands. I'd find him sitting in the dark, staring at his phone, dreading the next call from Carol. He wanted to be a good son, but it was clear that no matter how much he did, it was never enough for her. Carol's neediness was like a black hole, sucking the joy out of everything. I tried to encourage Josh to set boundaries, but it was a difficult conversation. He'd been raised to believe that taking care of his mother was his responsibility, and Carol had done a great job of reinforcing that belief. "I just don't want her to feel abandoned," he'd say, torn between his loyalty to his mother and his commitment to our marriage. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the guilt, the frustration, the fear of letting her down. One evening, after another heated argument with Carol, Josh finally broke down. "I can't keep doing this, Sarah," he admitted, tears in his eyes. "I feel like I'm failing everyone." I hugged him, trying to offer comfort. "You're not failing, Josh. You're doing more than anyone could ever ask of you. But you can't keep sacrificing your happiness and ours just to keep her happy. It's not fair to you." Josh nodded, but I knew it wasn't going to be that simple. Carol's hold on him was strong, and it would take more than a few conversations to break free from her influence. But it was a start, and I was determined to help Josh reclaim his life. The final straw came at Carol's 58th birthday party. Josh and I had planned a small celebration at her favorite restaurant, inviting a few of her close friends and family members. We wanted to make the day special for her, and we spared no expense: decorations, gifts, a beautiful cake, the whole 9 yards. I spent hours making sure every detail was perfect, from the floral centerpieces to the personalized menu cards. I was determined to show Carol that we cared, hoping that this grand gesture might finally win her approval. But from the moment we arrived, Carol was in rare form. Carol barely acknowledged me when we got there, turning her attention immediately to Josh. "Oh, my boy is here," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around him like they hadn't seen each other in years. I stood there awkwardly, holding the gift bag, feeling like an outsider at my own event. Throughout the dinner, Carol kept finding ways to undermine me. She'd make snide comments about my cooking, joke about how Josh must be starving since I wasn't much of a chef, and even criticize the outfit I'd chosen for the evening. "Oh, that's an interesting choice, Sarah," she said, eyeing my dress with thinly veiled disdain. "I suppose it's the thought that counts." I tried to keep my cool, smiling through clenched teeth and focusing on the positive. But the subtle digs kept coming. At one point, Carol asked Josh how work was going and then pivoted to tell him how much she missed the days when he was single. "You were always so focused back then, Josh," she said with a wistful smile. "You didn't have any distractions." Josh squeezed my hand under the table, a silent reassurance that he was on my side, but I could see the tension building. I wanted to say something, to defend myself, but I didn't want to ruin her birthday. I kept reminding myself that this was just one night, that we could get through it. But then came the moment that pushed me over the edge. As we were getting ready to sing Happy Birthday, Carol stood up and made a little speech. At first, it seemed harmless, just a few words about how much she appreciated everyone being there. But then she turned her attention to me. "And I'd like to thank Sarah," she began, her tone dripping with false sweetness, "for putting up with my son. He can be a handful, but I suppose you're doing your best." The room went silent, and I could feel everyone's eyes on me. I was humiliated, my face burning with embarrassment. Carol's friends exchanged awkward glances, clearly uncomfortable with her comment, but Carol just smiled, like she hadn't said anything out of the ordinary. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my face flushing red as I fought back tears. I'd worked so hard to make this night special, to show Carol that I cared, and this was how she repaid me, with a public humiliation meant to tear me down in front of everyone. Josh looked furious. He stood up, ready to defend me, but I grabbed his arm and shook my head, not wanting to make a scene. We got through the rest of the dinner in strained silence, and as soon as it was over, we left. In the car, Josh exploded. "I'm done, Sarah. I'm done with her treating you like this. We've given her everything, and she has no right." I was still in shock, but Josh's anger fueled my own. "We need to set boundaries," I said, my voice shaking with frustration. "We can't keep letting her walk all over us. And we definitely can't keep supporting her." Josh agreed, and we made a decision right then and there. We would cut Carol off financially. It wasn't just about the money, it was about standing up for ourselves and refusing to let her toxic behavior continue to control our lives. It was time to draw a line. The next day, Josh called Carol to tell her the news. He explained that we were no longer going to support her financially and that she needed to start managing her own expenses. Carol did not take it well. She screamed, cried, and accused Josh of abandoning her. She called me every name in the book, blaming me for turning her son against her. It was ugly. "How could you do this to me?" she shrieked over the phone. "I've done everything for you, Josh. And now you're just going to leave me to fend for myself? All because of that woman?" Josh tried to stay calm, but I could see how much it hurt him. Carol's words were cutting deep, and she was using every emotional weapon in her arsenal to manipulate him. But this time, Josh didn't back down. "This isn't about Sarah," he said firmly. This is about you needing to take responsibility for your own life. We've helped you for years, but it's time for you to stand on your own." Carol hung up on him, and for the next few weeks, we didn't hear a word. I hoped that maybe she'd finally get the message and start figuring things out for herself, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Carol wasn't the type to quietly accept defeat, and it didn't take long for her to retaliate. Carol started spreading false rumors about me to anyone who would listen. She'd call family members, friends, and even acquaintances, telling them all sorts of lies. She claimed that I was controlling Josh, that I'd forced him to cut her off, and that I was only interested in his money. She painted herself as the victim, a poor, struggling mother who'd been betrayed by her own son and his gold-digging wife. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself that anyone who really knew us wouldn't believe Carol's lies. But the rumors spread like wildfire. I started getting cold stares at family gatherings, snide comments from distant relatives, and even accusatory messages on social media. Carol had managed to turn people against me, and it felt like I was fighting a battle I couldn't win. One day, I ran into one of Carol's friends at the grocery store. She looked me up and down, her eyes filled with judgment. "I heard what you did to Carol," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's a shame how some people take advantage of others." I was stunned, too shocked to even respond. I hurried out of the store, feeling humiliated and angry. Carol was poisoning everyone's perception of me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The rumors got worse when Carol started contacting extended family members, people who didn't know us well but knew Carol's version of events. I received a call from Josh's Aunt Linda, a woman I'd met only a handful of times at family gatherings. She was furious, accusing me of turning Josh against his mother and abandoning her when she needed him most. "You've ruined this family, Sarah," she spat. "Carol has always been there for Josh, and now you've poisoned him against her. What kind of woman does that?" I tried to explain, but it was clear that Aunt Linda wasn't interested in hearing my side. She'd already made up her mind, and Carol's manipulations had worked perfectly. I hung up the phone, feeling more isolated than ever. The walls were closing in, and I didn't know how to fight back against the lies that were spreading like a virus. Josh and I tried to weather the storm, but it was exhausting. We'd spent years trying to do right by Carol, and now we were being vilified for finally setting boundaries. Josh was struggling too. He was angry at his mom, but also hurt by how quickly people were willing to believe the worst about us. We decided that enough was enough. We weren't going to let Carol control the narrative, and we certainly weren't going to let her lies dictate our lives. Josh reached out to his family and friends, explaining the truth about what had happened. He was honest about Carol's manipulative behavior and how we'd been supporting her financially for years. He told them about the birthday party, the constant guilt trips, and the decision to finally cut her off. Some people understood, but others remained loyal to Carol. They'd known her for decades, and it was easier to believe her version of events than to accept that she might be at fault. Josh and I realized that we couldn't change everyone's minds, and that was okay. We didn't need everyone to be on our side, we just needed to stand firm in our decision. We also decided to block Carol on social media and limit our interactions with the people who continued to spread her lies. It was painful, but necessary. We couldn't keep letting her toxicity invade our lives. Josh and I focused on each other, on our marriage, and on building a future that was free from Carol's influence. One evening, Josh sat me down and looked me in the eyes. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I should have stood up to her sooner. I should have protected you." I squeezed his hand, grateful for his support. "We did what we had to do," I replied. "We can't change the past, but we can decide how we move forward." We started going to therapy, both individually and as a couple, to work through the impact that Carol's behavior had on us. It was a process, but it helped us understand the importance of boundaries and the need to prioritize our own well-being. We learned that it was okay to say no, to protect our peace, and to distance ourselves from toxic people even if they were family. One breakthrough session came when our therapist helped Josh unpack the deep-seated guilt he felt about his mom. He'd spent his whole life trying to make up for his dad's absence, to be the perfect son, and Carol had manipulated that guilt to keep him under her thumb. Josh realized that his relationship with his mom was not about love, it was about control. And it was time for him to let go of that guilt and prioritize the family he was building with me. As for me, therapy helped me rebuild my confidence and my sense of self-worth. Carol's constant criticisms had made me question myself for years, and I'd allowed her words to shape how I saw myself. But through therapy, I learned that I was not the problem, Carol was. I learned to stand up for myself, to set boundaries, and to stop seeking validation from people who would never give it. We also took practical steps to protect ourselves from Carol's continued attempts to sabotage us. We changed the locks on our house, ensuring that she no longer had access to our home. We tightened our social circle, surrounding ourselves with people who were genuinely supportive and cut out those who thrived on drama and gossip. We were reclaiming our space, both physically and emotionally, and it felt empowering. Cutting Carol off was one of the hardest things we'd ever done, but it was also the most liberating. Without her constant demands, Josh and I were able to focus on our own goals and dreams. We started traveling more, picking up hobbies we'd put aside, and reconnecting with friends who truly supported us. Our relationship grew stronger, and we learned to communicate in ways that we hadn't before. I also found my voice again. For years, I'd been walking on eggshells around Carol, afraid to upset her or trigger another one of her guilt trips. But now, I was free to be myself. I threw myself into my work, started a side business selling handmade jewelry, and even took up painting, a hobby I'd abandoned when life got too hectic. I was rediscovering who I was, and it felt incredible. Josh flourished too. He started taking on new projects at work, and with the extra time and mental space, he found himself excelling in ways he hadn't before. He signed up for a leadership program at his company, which eventually led to a promotion. Without Carol's constant interference, Josh was finally able to focus on his own growth, both personally and professionally. We also took the time to reconnect with people who had been supportive during the whole ordeal. We hosted dinners, went on group hikes, and even organized a weekend getaway with friends. We were building a community of people who loved us for who we were, not for what we could do for them. One evening, Josh and I decided to host a small dinner party at our house, a way to celebrate our new beginnings and reconnect with the people who mattered most. We invited close friends, a few family members who had stood by us, and some new friends we'd made along the way. It was a simple evening, filled with laughter, good food, and the warmth of genuine connection. As we sat around the table, I realized how far we'd come. We'd faced so many challenges, but we'd come out stronger on the other side. Josh raised his glass for a toast, his eyes shining with gratitude. To new beginnings, he said, his voice filled with emotion. And to the people who make them worth fighting for. I looked around at the faces of our friends, our chosen family, and I felt a deep sense of peace. We didn't need Carol's approval, her money, or her toxic influence. We had each other, and that was enough. The rumors eventually died down as people moved on to the next piece of gossip. Carol's campaign to ruin our reputation lost steam when it became clear that we weren't engaging. We stopped giving her power over our lives, and in time, the noise faded into the background. It wasn't easy, but we learned that we couldn't control what people believed, we could only control how we responded. One day, Josh received an unexpected letter from Carol. It was brief, almost cold, but there was a hint of regret. "I'm sorry for what's happened between us," she wrote. "But I did what I thought was right." It wasn't the heartfelt apology we'd hoped for, but it was a step. Josh chose not to respond. We'd already closed that chapter, and reopening it wouldn't change anything. Josh and I continued to focus on our future. We took a dream vacation to Europe, something we'd always talked about but never found the time to do. We started volunteering together at a local animal shelter, finding joy in giving back to our community. And we continued to build the life we wanted, on our terms. Update: the aftermath. Opie, my MAL, humiliated me at her birthday party, so my husband and I cut her off financially. Then she started creating false rumors about me. Hey everyone, I wanted to give an update and thank you all for your support. It's been a tough journey, but we're finally in a better place. Cutting off my MAL, Carol, was the hardest thing we've ever done, but it was the right decision for us. We've set boundaries, and we're no longer letting her toxicity control our lives. Carol's still spreading rumors, and while it hurts, we've decided to focus on the people who truly know and support us. Josh and I have grown closer, and we're excited about the future we're building together, one that's filled with love, respect, and healthy boundaries. We've also found incredible support through therapy. It's helped us rebuild our confidence and learn to prioritize our own needs without feeling guilty. We're not perfect, and we're still healing, but we're moving forward with hope and optimism. To anyone dealing with toxic family members, just know that it's okay to set limits. You don't owe anyone your peace, and you have the right to protect your happiness. It's not easy, but standing up for yourself is worth it. Thanks for being part of our journey. Here's to new beginnings, to finding strength in each other, and to living life on our own terms.